Welcome back to WD
FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. We're your host, Brie Bertolacini, marketing manager.
and Chris Mullen, Marketing and Editorial Specialist at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Happy New Year, Chris.
Happy New Year and happy no beard as well. For all those listening on an audio-only platform, I am now a mustache man. We'll see how long into 2024 that lasts.
You're really taking your research into Walt Disney to a whole new level, Chris.
Oh, yeah. If you're going to understand the man, you got to be the man or something. You got to beat the man to have his mustache. I don't know, but we'll see. That will
You're rocking
also
the stash. That's what we
it,
know.
it will not be up for voting in Collections Clash if I keep my mustache or not. So 2024 is going to be an exciting year here at the Walt Disney Family Museum. I can't wait to see what's in store. Historically speaking, this month has a fair number of important anniversaries. So let's do a quick roundup, Brie.
Yep, let's highlight some of those great Disney history moments. And first up, we have an unsung Disney film, so dear to my heart. It's celebrating its 65th anniversary, and that debuted on January 19th, 1949. So a little bit about the film. It's based on the 1943 novel Midnight and Jeremiah by Sterling North. And this adaptation takes place in the fictional Fulton Corners, Indiana, 1903. Now, a young boy, Jeremiah Kincaid, played by Bobby Driscoll, you might also know him as the voice of Peter Pan. He adopts a mischievous black lamb named Danny, and Jeremiah is eager to enter Danny into the Pike County Fair and struggles to earn enough money for the entry fee. Now, there's a mix of animation and live action in this film. It's one of those hybrid films. Now, this film was so dear to Walt's heart, and he shared, quote, "So dear was especially close to me. Why, that's the life my brother and I grew up with as kids out in Missouri. The great racehorse Dan Patch was a hero to us. We had Dan Patch's grandson on my father's farm," end quote. Hence the little Easter egg of naming the little black lamb Danny after this famous racehorse, a horse guy through and through.
I love pets that have human names. And switching gears to a film where just about all of the pets do not have traditional human names. 101 Dalmatians is celebrating its 63rd anniversary on January 25th. This film had a lot riding on its success due to the increasing costs of animation. Walt's previous film, Sleeping Beauty, had cost double the price of Walt's previous animated films and more than a third of what it took to open Disneyland. Disney legend Ub Iwerks experimented with the Xerox process, and the investment paid off as Xeroxing animator drawings directly onto cells proved to be a more economical way to produce animated films, making it sustainable for Walt Disney Productions to continue making animated features. This film has a distinctive modern animation style and produced an iconic cast of characters like the devilish villain Cruella de Vil. If anybody was wondering why Cruella de Vil's last name was DeVille, devilish. We just have to make sure everybody's along for the ride. We have a section of our special exhibition on display right now, Disney Cats and Dogs, dedicated to the film's titular canines.
I always love 101 Dalmatians, one of my favorites. Now, switching gears a little bit off of our films, the next one is a very special anniversary. It's the 100th anniversary of Lillian Bounds starting at the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, and that took place on January 19th, 1924. Now, Lillian moved to Los Angeles after her father passed away in Idaho. She moved in with her sister Hazel in Hollywood. Now, Kathleen Dollard, the first employee at the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, had suggested Lillian apply to work for Walt. On January 19th, 1924, she started at the studios as a blackener, which is a process in black and white ink and paint where you add in the black tones to the celluloid. And well, the rest is history. Lily and Walt were married on July 13th, 1925, a little more than a year later.
I hope she won Employee of the Month at some point. On on January 29th, Sleeping Beauty celebrates its 65th anniversary of release. As I mentioned before, this film was the most expensive Disney film made at that point in 1959, and that was partially due to the elaborate painting style and detailed background designs done by Ivan Earl. The film tells the story of Princess Aurora, who was cursed by the evil fairy Maleficent to die before the sun sets on her 16th birthday by pricking her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel. What a way to go. Luckily, this film ends in a happily ever after, and thanks to this film, we have the Sleeping Beauty castle at Disneyland. While Disneyland opened in 1955 and Sleeping Beauty premiered over 4 years later, naming the castle after Princess Aurora was a great way to get people excited to see the film. I personally would love to have faith in any of my projects as much as Walt had, naming an attraction, the real centerpiece of his very first theme park after a film that had not even been released yet.
Yeah, that I always love all of the clever ways that Walt was able to kind of leverage Disneyland, and it was just like the ultimate marketing tool. Disneyland was always just kind of this like marketing tool as a way to enhance all of these film projects and TV projects. So I love it. I could talk all day about the marketing aspects of it.
The TVs and movies influenced the parks, and then full circle, the parks then influenced TVs and movies.
Yeah, full circle. I love it. Well, that was a great roundup of some important Disney dates. Now, looking at some great Disney Family Museum dates with our museum roundup. So, first up, join us every weekend during January for our month long screening of 2006's Eight Below. This heartwarming tale based on a true story of a man who will stop at nothing to save his beloved sled dogs, starring the late Paul Walker. Now visit our website at waltdisney.org/calendar for showtimes.
According to our social media, a lot of people really like that movie. So if you haven't seen it, come out and see it. Tickets are still available for our upcoming talk behind Wally Bogue's historic tenure at the Golden Horseshoe Review on Saturday, January 20th. This special talk will be presented by Lawrence Bogue, son of beloved Disney stage performer and one of Walt's favorite comedians, Disney legend Wally Bogue. Lawrence will share memories of his father and his own unique experiences growing up behind the scenes and eventually on stage as a cast member at Disneyland. Visit our website to get your tickets.
Now join us Saturday, 27th for a community day with the SFSPCA in celebration of our latest special exhibition, Disney Cats and Dogs. We are partnering with the San Francisco SPCA to bring furry friends from their animal assisted therapy program. Now, representatives from the SFSPCA Animal Assisted Therapy Program will be sharing how the program facilitates communication and healing by sharing the love of companion animals with those facing mental, physical, and educational challenges. So join us for an opportunity to meet with the animals and practice live animal sketching using the animals as models. The first 100 attendees will get free admission to Disney Cats and Dogs. Registration is required. Visit our website for more information.
Don't miss your chance to see these animals, or else that's pretty rough. Not my best. We have recently announced new Studio Series workshops for January and February. Studio Series workshops are 90-minute sessions exploring different topics and learning how to animate them. Classes are available for adults and youth. Available in-person workshops include Animate a Classroom Pet Studying and Animate Sewing, and a virtual and in-person version of Animate a Cartoon's Heartbeat is also available. Visit our calendar for more information. It's that time again for our awards lobby object to be rotated in celebration of the Walt Disney Company's 100th anniversary. We're saying goodbye to Margaret Carey's ballet slippers she used as the live-action reference model for Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. Now on display for the first time is Jimmy Dodd's mouse guitar and Mouse Dance's record. Actor and songwriter Jimmy Dodd was the host of the Mickey Mouse Club TV show during its first 4 seasons, appearing with the show's ensemble cast from 1955 to 1959. After seeing Dodd audition to perform a song in his TV show, Walt Disney reportedly exclaimed, quote, "Hey, Jim's the one who should be on the Mickey Mouse Club," end quote. Dodd is the author of more than 400 songs and compositions, including the notable Mickey Mouse Club March, the show's popular theme song. This 4-string tenor guitar is one of 2 such instruments known to have been played by Dodd on the Mickey Mouse Club. It was made by Candelario Delgado of Candela's Guitar Shop. where the Delgado family of luthiers, or craftspeople who make stringed instruments, have been making guitars in Los Angeles' Boyle Heights neighborhood since 1947.
Now, Jimmy Dodd's mouse guitar was gifted to the Walt Disney Family Museum in 2019. It was previously part of the Jimmy Dodd Archive housed at Cal Arts in Valencia, California. A representative of Cal Arts reached out to our collections team with a generous offer to transfer the guitar, its case, and guitar accessories to the museum. Cal Arts was selected by his family because of its connection to the Disney family, as Cal Arts had been founded by Walt and Roy Oliver in 1961. Now, since this is such a special object in Disney history, it was gifted to the museum so it could be seen by the public. So, this is a very special first time viewing of this mouse guitar that is on display.
We hope you get a chance to see this special object on view for a very limited time. While here, don't miss our special exhibitions currently on view: Disney Cats and Dogs and Possibilities Unleashed, a pet portrait exhibition.
Now, time for our collections clash. Last month's theme was objects that featured the color red. This was a really fun topic, and I know in the future we'll hopefully go through the rest of the color wheel, but let's take a look at how it went. Now, first round was between my pick of the Autopia car that received 75% of the votes, and Chris's pick of a different mouse guitar, one that's currently on view, and that received 25% of the votes.
Yeah, that mouse guitar is a red plastic mouse guitar that would have been available commercially as merchandise. Not a lot of musical fans out there. I'm
We have a
keeping
lot of
track
car
of.
fans.
Yeah, that's fair. We love transportation here. In round two, my pick of the Gremlins book received 11% of the votes, and Bree's pick of the Disneyland apartment lamp dominated the round with 89% of the votes. I have a feeling there was some Gremlins mischief going on in the tabulating of these votes that might have sabotaged me that round.
Well, we'll blame the gremlins for that round. I did do the tabulations, but I was no gremlins that I could see.
If you're still in line to vote for Gremlins, stay in line.
Well, the last round was between my pick of the Seven Dwarfs cell that featured Grumpy and Doc, and that received 63% of the votes, and Chris's pick of the Queen of Hearts concept art that was done by Mary Blair that received 37% of the votes. And I think this is a very notable time. This is the first time a Mary Blair artwork has lost a round. Like, it's crazy.
Off with their heads, all of them. It is very surprising. Well, congrats, Bree, on your very well-earned blowout win.
Thank you. Well, before we get into this month's round, we received a great email that I kind of wanted to spotlight here pertaining to my pick of the Disneyland apartment lamp that I wanted to share. So, if you recall, when speaking about the history of the vibrant cranberry glass featured in the Disneyland apartment, it was decorated by Academy Award winner Emil Curry. Well, Curry won that Academy Award for his work on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. One of our wonderful museum volunteers, Mark Siegel, shared this other great red connection between Emil Curry, sharing, quote, "For Nemo's cabin in the Nautilus, set director Emil Curry designed the furnishings, the central sofa, ottomans, cushions, to be upholstered in red. When cinematographer Franz Planner first came to the set and saw all the red upholstery after already shooting a camera test of Nemo in his red quilted jacket, he got very concerned about the contrast of the different reds and insisted that Curry change the upholstery of all the furniture into some other color. Although Curry was an excellent team player, he strongly believed in his own artistic vision and refused to do it. This actually caused Walt to come to the set to ask what the problem was. Curry explained to Walt that the combination of the different reds was going to be extraordinary and that was really what his design was. So Walt ordered that a camera test be shot, and when they saw it in the projection room, everyone realized how beautiful it was and that the saturation of the different reds looked magnificent. So the upholstery remained as Curry designed it. End quote. So thank you, Mark, for sharing this wonderful connection. Mark is our go-to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea expert, and for a long time would actually do spotlight talks in the museum galleries about this film.
Yeah, imagine if Walt had gone on set and went all Saving Mr. Banks and just said, "No red in the picture." That would have been quite the decision to make. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when that happened. Yes, thank you, Mark. I greatly miss popping down from the offices to see your 20,000 League Spotlight talk every week that I could. And can't wait to get to the 20,000 Leagues anniversary later on this year. Well, in celebration of the new year, we are kicking off 2024's first Collections Clash celebrating resolutions. I know many of you have probably set your resolutions for the year. Some of them might already be discarded. But we wanted to interpret some resolutions Walt made or might have made throughout his life and find objects in the museum that represent those resolutions. Bree, since you won last month's round, you get to go first.
Well, I always love these types of collections clash where we can kind of interpret this in our own unique way. So I'm very excited. My first pick is Walt's resolution to never make a character he didn't fully own. And this is represented by an animation drawing of Steamboat Willie. So, as most of us know, the fateful story of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, I'll sum it up. We'll do the Cliff Notes version. The Alice comedies came to an end. Universal Pictures, now known as Universal Studios, so we all know who we're talking about here, they were interested in developing a cartoon series starring a rabbit character. The Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio was suggested to animate the series that was named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. During the series run, it was super successful, and Walt headed to New York to negotiate with his distributor, Charles Mintz, for more money to produce the shorts. During the negotiations, Walt was met with the tough reality that even though Walt's rising studio had animated and established the character, Oswald was owned by Universal. So, disheartened by the news, Walt resolved to never work for somebody else. He walked away without Oswald and much of his staff. Walt was determined to create a new series to keep their business afloat. Mickey Mouse was the success that came from that resolve. This animation drawing from Steamboat Willie really represents that success from that resolution. So from that point on, Walt only produced films and shorts with characters where he owned the rights.
Great resolution, Brie. My first pick is the resolution of Walt's education, as represented by Walt's honorary degrees on display in our awards lobby. Walt famously did not go to college, opting instead for the worldly education of driving ambulances in France for the Red Cross during World War I, then jumping right into the commercial art world upon his return to Kansas City. What some do not know is that Walt didn't even finish high school. Now, Walt wasn't the best student. One explanation for that is during his grade school years, school for Walt and his older brother, Roy, was sandwiched between delivering the morning and evening editions of the Kansas City Star newspaper. Walt always valued education, as he continued to correspond with favorite teachers of his later in life, but life took him in a different direction than conventional classroom instruction. But a nice full circle moment for Walt was when he was awarded with honorary doctorate degrees from the likes of Harvard, Yale, USC, and UCLA for his contribution to the fine arts, specifically his pioneering work creating a new American art form. And I'd say that goes a little bit further than one of those gold stars on a homework assignment with an anthropomorphic star giving a gloved thumbs up. And you know exactly which one I'm talking about.
Well, that was a great pick. I love kind of talking about Walt's education and these kind of honorary degrees. And I know that they meant so much to him when receiving them. We have some wonderful quotes about that. So great pick. Well, this is a snake style draft. So what you got for the next round?
My second pick is Walt's resolution from way back in the 1930s that was resolved in the mid 1960s to make Mary Poppins into a feature film as symbolized by our first edition copy of Mary Poppins on display in Gallery 9. This first edition copy was gifted to Walt, hot off the press in 1934 by publisher Raynal and Hitchcock. Though it's common to send books to film producers in hopes that they'll adapt them, this book came with a special inscription that reads, quote, "To Walt Disney, not another Mickey, but I think you should like our Mary, Eugene Raynal." This very book resided in the Disney home for many years, along with other copies, including a copy that belonged to Walt's daughter and our museum's co-founder, Diane. Though the Disney Company's first negotiations with the book's author, P.L. Travers, occurred in December of 1938, Diane's love of the book certainly inspired Walt to pursue the rights, despite early obstacles. During the eventual 1964 promotion of the film, Walt recalled how much Diane enjoyed the story, how it made her laugh, and that when he read it himself, he recognized it immediately as, quote, Disney material, as it possessed many of the same qualities of his previous films. It was family-friendly, full of rich characters, and combined elements of fantasy and magic with the mundane. In 1944, when Travers was living in New York to escape the London Blitz of World War II, Roy Disney contacted Travers on Walt's behalf to further discuss the film rights. Roy wrote to Walt saying the talks were positive. Travers had previously written about Disney Pictures for magazines, after all, but at the same time, Travers seemed to be stalling and made vague excuses that her American publishers were preventing her from pursuing an agreement with Disney. She told Roy to have Walt call her personally. Truth be told, Travers was very hesitant because she couldn't picture her Mary as a cartoon character, despite Roy assuring her it would be a combination of live action and animated elements. Determined to sway Travers, Walt did call her personally and followed up that discussion with an invitation for her to meet him at the studios in Burbank. Ever persistent, Walt made time to meet with her in the 1950s while filming live action projects in England, but despite all of these discussions, Travers remained noncommittal. Finally, when the book's royalties were dwindling in 1959-1960, Travers agreed, but insisted the film be a live-action production. Walt's eagerness to produce the film had grown so acutely that he paid Travers an extraordinary advance of $100,000 and granted her final approval of the script and screen treatment, as well as 5% of the film's royalties, which was unheard of for Disney Productions. And the rest, as they say, is history, and a supercalifragilisticexpialidocious one at that.
I love that. That was such a great summation of kind of that resolution and determination to get that film made, which I'm so glad he did. Mary Poppins is one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
My next pick, I'm going with Walt's resolution to move to Hollywood to make films after the failure of his first animation studio, Laugh-O-Gram Films, in Kansas City. Now, this is represented by the Bell and Howell camera on display in our second gallery. Walt moved to Hollywood with the aspirations to get into the live action filmmaking business and kind of set aside his animated aspirations. At the time, New York was the hub for animation studios, and Hollywood was a place for moving silent pictures. Now, remember, this is 1923. It would be another 4 years before The Jazz Singer would debut and become a sensation for synchronization and sound for films. Now, when Walt arrived in Hollywood in 1923, he visited the film studios looking for a job. One of the first studios he actually visited was Universal. He had a contact back in Kansas City from Universal News who was able to give him a pass to go on like backlots. And so Walt got there early and stayed until the sun went down, kind of walking through every single set, just soaking up all of that kind of Hollywood magic. He was super eager to get a job in any capacity as long as it was on a film set. So a friend from Kansas City was an extra, and he got Walt to join him on the Paramount production of The Light That Failed because Walt could ride a horse. So they were extras who were required to ride horses. So that was great. Unfortunately for Walt, he was not needed for that day, so did not appear as an extra on that film. So Walt told journalist Pete Martin, quote, "That was the end of my career as an actor." So things started to look hopeless, and Walt actually decided to pitch to Pantages Theater the same idea of running a joke reel in the theater that he had found success with Newman Laugh-O-Grams back in Kansas City. A representative took the meeting with Walt at the theater, and after Walt's pitch, he said that Mr. Pantages wouldn't be interested. And honestly, just like the movies and Walt's recollection, Mr. Pantages spoke up from the back of the room and said, "How do you know I wouldn't?" And that was the moment kind of Walt was back pursuing animation again. He made a deal with Mr. Pantages. He was producing animated joke reels that would play before the films. So I think many of you know that from there, Walt revisited his film Alice in Cartoonland. And, you know, just like we keep saying, I think every round, the rest is history. Walt never gave up on his resolution to pursue filmmaking in Hollywood in any capacity. So to kind of bring it full circle, New York in the early 1920s, when Walt was, you know, thinking about what he wanted to do next after the failure of Laugh-O-Grams, New York was the hub for animation, and Hollywood was the place for live action. And he made that decision to come out to Hollywood. And with the success of Disney animated films, the West Coast is now the prevailing hub of animation today. So just he's the reason. So cool. I love it.
Great pick. And, you know, the rest is history. We'll see how many more times we can slip that in this broadcast. Kick us off with the last round.
For my last pick, I'm going with Walt's resolution about making nature documentaries represented by the Arriflex 16mm camera on display. This is not a camera round, but I just realized I picked two cameras, two out of three for the rounds. Okay. Even as early as the 1940s and 50s, Walt was concerned about the environment and searching to tell stories derived from the natural world for the silver screen. He enlisted husband and wife team Alfred and Alma Malott to go to Alaska. Now, Walt studied the reels and kind of zeroed in on the footage of the seals as being kind of promising for a nature focused film project that eventually would result in Seal Island. Disney's distributor, RKO, was just uninterested in the nature documentary. Walt always took kind of the same approach that he had taken in the early days of his career with Steamboat Willie and the first Silly Symphony, The Skeleton Dance. And he took the film directly to the local theater, cutting kind of the middleman, the distributor, out of the equation. So he took it to the Crown Theater in Pasadena to exhibit the film for a week in late December 1948. Now, if you know kind of anything a little bit about award season, there's some rules and stipulations in order to get your film acknowledged or even considered. So you have to have, and back in the day, it's still true today, you have to have your film run in a theater consecutively for 7 days in order to be qualified to submit your film for consideration for the Academy Awards. Well, Walt's determination and resolution to create the nature documentaries really paid off. And on March 24th, 1949, Walt accepted the Best Two Reel Documentary Academy Award for Seal Island. So really paid off. Now, Seal Island was the first in a series of 13 films called The True Life Adventures, which documented the wonders of the natural world. The Malotts used the Airflex camera to its full advantage, as Walt wrote for The Atlantic in 1954, quote, "In Africa, operating from their specially built armored truck, the Malotts used the Airflex camera and a 16-inch scope to bring the more savage quarry within safe range. The lioness who stalks and kills the wildebeest for a hungry family, seemingly only a few feet beyond the camera, was actually photographed some 800 yards away." So the more you know.
Great pick. For my last pick, I'm going with the resolution of Walt's relationship with the Chenard Art Institute, culminating in the creation of California Institute of the Arts, also known as CalArts, represented by an art school book from the 1930s. Now, stay with me. As touched on earlier, Walt may not have been a conventional student, but he greatly valued education. In his youth, he occasionally took night art classes at the Kansas City Art Institute. When he was expanding the possibilities of animation with the innovative and experimental Silly Symphony series in the 1930s, Walt worked with the Chenard Art Institute to provide instruction to his artists on Friday nights in an effort to elevate their art. Walt even drove some of the artists to the classes himself. The classes ended by summer 1932, but in November of that year, Walt hired Don Graham, an instructor at Chenard with an engineering background, to teach classes at the studio 2 nights a week. By 1935, Don Graham's classes became a full-fledged art school at the studio, with new hires spending their first 2 weeks out of a potentially 6 to 8 week series, total of instruction in drawing and animation being taught by Graham himself. Now, the Chenard Art Institute fell on some hard financial times in the 1960s, and Walt looked back fondly on not only their relationship together, working together to instruct Walt's artists, but the fact that Walt may not have always had the money to pay for the art classes, but Chenard was always very generous with their time and instructors, and Walt found a way to bring together the Chenard Art Institute and the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music, bringing them together and creating California Institute of the Arts, which still today produces top talent in creative industries, in animation, theme park design, etc. So all kind of coming full circle there, a resolution of how Walt and his team were given such great instruction generously, culminating in the creation of a lasting top tier art school. Now, this book we have on display is a class notebook from a session of the action analysis class called Director's Relationship to the Picture and the Animator, taught from February 27th, 1936 to August 9th, 1938 by Don Graham with Dave Hand as a special speaker. Now, Dave Hand was a really good choice for a special speaker, considering that during the years that this class took place, he served as the supervising director of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's just a really cool artifact that I never really stopped to take a closer look at before this collections clash. What an opportunity. Class is in session.
It really is, Chris. I honestly had no idea what you were talking about when you mentioned this school book. Now it's something I have to go find because no matter how many times we visited and walked through the Walt Disney Family Museum, sometimes I feel like I know it like the back of my hand. I don't, because there's gems like this still waiting to be explored. So thank you so much for this like great final pick. I'm obsessed with it. Well, now it is time for our honorable mentions. These are just for fun and they will not be up for voting. Now, my first honorable mention is Walt's resolution to not make movies for children, represented by this concept art depicting the old hag from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Walt is quoted saying, quote, "I do not make films primarily for children. I make them for the child in all of us, whether we be 6 or 60, end quote. I love that kind of that resolve, that kind of way to make films. I think that just makes them honestly more appealing. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was definitely not a children's movie, or at least one that didn't just appeal to children. Now, I picked this concept art in particular of the old hag to best represent this resolution because she is just pretty frightening looking in general. And don't just take my opinion. Diane Disney Miller recalled seeing Snow White for the first time. Here's what she remembered. Quote, "When the old witch came on, I was so terrified. I had my hands in front of my face, peeking through my hands or not peeking at all, and crying. I was so terribly afraid that they took me out into the sunlight," end quote. Now, this frightening sequence was too much even for Walt's daughter. So,
Yeah, she had just turned 4 when that movie
mhm.
came out. Yeah, that's look, I'm not one to talk about anybody's parenting styles, but that's a little too scary, I think, for someone of that age. But my
It
first
toughens the kids.
yeah, you throw them out there, see what the world's all about. My first honorable mention on Walt's resolutions was the resolution of the 1941 animator strike, symbolized by the strike signs that we have on display in Gallery 6. Now, these are reproductions and not artifacts, hence disqualified from the contest, but arguably there are a few situations in the history of the Walt Disney Company under Walt's leadership that needed resolving as direly as the strike. The strike lasted for a few months, and that time was a huge inflection point in the relationship between Walt and his artists. Some artists left and never returned. Some artists, like Art Babbitt, left and returned a few times. It was part of what Walt called, quote, the toughest period in his whole life.
Well, that was a great honorable mention. Always enjoy kind of talking about the strike. It's always a touchy subject. For my second honorable mention, I'm going with Walt's resolution to, quote, never neglect his family for business, represented by these family photos with his daughters we have on display. Because I just couldn't pick one, had to pick them all. It's an honorable mention. So
There's no rules.
no rules here. Well, Walt was such a big family man who loved spending kind of quality time with his daughters, Diane and Sharon, every Sunday growing up, which they dubbed Daddy's Day. Walt recalled, quote, "I never brought my family much in on the studio and things. I kept them free of the studio. I lived with it too much, and I just did not want to live with it at home. I tried to set up my home as something apart," end quote. Work-life balance, am I right? His dedication with spending time with his family carried on through the rest of his life, and he always made time to spend with his grandchildren as his daughters' families grew. I always love the photos on display of Walt and Lillian taking 4 of their grandchildren to SeaWorld, and they are all in matching blue and white seersucker outfits.
I laugh at the mental image of Walt and Lillian and the grandkids sitting in the splash zone of the first couple of rows of one of those water shows. A picture would have been worth a thousand words there.
Yeah, we look at Disneyland so much. I honestly don't know if what kind of shows they were doing at SeaWorld back in the day, but who knows?
That's the subject of a different pod.
Yeah.
My second honorable mention was the resolution of Walt's issues with his distributors. One in particular, Pat Powers, as told through this reproduced telegram we have on display from Walt to Roy, dated February 7th, 1930. The telegram reads, quote, "Have definitely broken with Powers. Stop. Will deliver no more pictures. Stop. Plan to temporarily suspend production Mickeys and concentrate on symphonies, which we will deliver direct to Columbia. Stop. Hope you have not delivered Prince's 16th Mickey to McFarland. Stop. Stall Moret as song deal pending. Stop. Inform me when symphony is ready for delivery. Regards, Walt." End quote. For some backstory, Walt's limited budget to approach the sound process for Steamboat Willie led him to the office of Pat Powers, one of the founders of Universal Pictures. Powers had his own sound recording business that he operated at a fraction of the cost of the industry heavyweights such as RCA. He agreed to distribute Walt's cartoons through his label, Celebrity Pictures, an offshoot of Columbia Pictures, and let him use his Cinephone recording process. While Walt inferred that Powers was more interested in promoting his sound technology than advancing the cartoon medium, Walt did not know that Powers' Cinephone technology was actually a cloned version of the already established phonofilm sound on film system pioneered by Lee DeForest, the quote, father of radio. In an unsuccessful bid to take over DeForest's phonofilm company, Powers had hired away technician Bill Garrity, a future Disney legend, to develop a near identical sound system to be labeled Cinephone for his own company to license out. Out of his overwhelming desire for sound equipment, Walt did not thoroughly read his contract with Powers, which he would later come to regret. The contract allowed Powers to advance Walt money on each film against the film's expected profits, but without a receipt showing just how much each Mickey cartoon was earning. Upon Roy's revelation that they were likely being swindled, they hired Gunther Lessing as company attorney and began satisfying all remaining legal requirements still owed to Powers while they looked for a more mutually beneficial distributor relationship. Much more serious in temperament than the boss, Walt famously joked to visitors that Lessing was, quote, the only mister we have at the studio. Here's a clip of Roy talking about breaking with Powers.
I come back from New York one time and I said, Walt, this Pat Powers is a crook. He's a definite crook. I can't find out what we've got coming to us. He makes us sign these notes. We signed a note every time we delivered a picture, which meant we owed him money. And Walt was very upset with me, and he said, you're just a troublemaker, you're suspicious, you don't believe in people, and so on. I said, all right, go back and find out for yourself. And he did go back there. Powers said, sign this 5-year contract here, and we'll go on with the business, Walt. And when Walt said, no, I'm not signing any contract, I want to know where I stand today. Pat finally said, well, you sign the contract, or I'll go into business myself. When he was back in New York and getting the real lowdown on Pat Powers on his way home, he tells me everything's fine. When I get back, we're going to make a big start. And then on the train, he sweated out some plans.
A crook, a definite crook. One of my favorite audio clips that we have in the galleries. So in response to this, Powers hired away Ub Iwerks, one of the only artists to stay loyal to Disney, while nearly the rest of the staff was being poached by Charles Mintz in the year prior to form his own independent animation studio. Carl Stalling, the studio composer, left around this time too, joining Iwerks' studio for a while, but eventually leaving for Warner Brothers, where he would gain legendary status arranging and composing music at a breakneck pace, averaging a complete score every week for their Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies series until his retirement 22 years later. These were devastating losses to Walt, reaffirming to him that reliance on outside businesses to perform important functions in the filmmaking process, particularly those run by big New York or Hollywood film executives, resulted in an uncomfortable amount of leverage switching hands. Following Walt's defection from Powers, Columbia expressed interest in continuing their relationship with Disney even without Powers as a middleman. So from 1930 to 1932, Columbia agreed to directly distribute Walt's new inventive Silly Symphony short cartoon series, as well as the ultra-successful Mickey Mouse series. Walt would later do business with United Artists and RKO Radio Pictures before self-distributing beginning in 1953.
I think it's such an interesting story, kind of those early Hollywood days. It felt like the wild, wild west out there. For my last honorable mention, I'm going to take the mood a little down. I'm going with Walt's resolution and promise to not rest on his laurels and kind of continue to push to make great pictures in his Showman of the World speech he gave in October 1966. This is unfortunately a resolution he was not able to keep himself, but one that his lasting legacy has endured. So here's the full quote. Now, before sitting down to count my blessings, I want to make you a promise. I promise we won't let this great honor you have paid us tonight go to our head. We have too many projects for the future to take time out for such a thing. On top of that, after 40 some odd years of ups and downs in this crazy business of ours, we know too well you are only as good as your next picture, end quote. So this award is on display in that kind of lead up to our final gallery. Walt sadly passed away in December 1966. And of course, this kind of sentiment that, you're only as good as your next picture, and kind of the promise of kind of pushing boundaries further. I can see it all throughout, like even at the Walt Disney Family Museum, in the company, and like the theme parks and what they're doing, always kind of using that sentiment. Keep moving forward, like we like to say.
Well, great honorable mention pick. You went to the very end, and I'm going to go a little bit closer to the beginning. My last honorable mention is the resolution, or should I say dissolution, of Laugh-O-Gram Films in Kansas City, as shown through a graphic of the Laugh-O-Gram bankruptcy papers. Laugh-O-Gram declared bankruptcy in 1923. The case was finally settled in 1927, 4 years after Walt rode the California Limited to Hollywood to start over. The graphic on display is one of hundreds of pages documenting the proceedings, itemizing various creditors that Laugh-O-Gram Films owed money to. If it wasn't for this resolution, maybe we don't have the Walt Disney Company.
Wow, I love that. That you never know.
Well, visit our Instagram stories today, January 18th, to vote on your favorite objects, or email us at podcast@wdfmuseum.org to cast your votes, or even share your thoughts and comments. Just not about my facial hair. Keep that to yourself.
Well, thanks for tuning in to WDFM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on all social channels at WDF Museum for all the latest updates.
And the rest was history. have a happy and healthy 2024, and keep moving forward. Bye.
Bye.